for me to steal me on this, so I made a better version of it, which goes like this. This is the better ontological argument. Step 1, imagine the concept of infinity. Step 2, infinity would be unlimited, possessing all possible properties. So when we're talking about infinity, we're imagining an infinite object, an unlimited object. This object must possess all properties and all qualities, because otherwise it would be finite and limited and not infinite. For example, if infinity did not include color in it, then it would lack color, and therefore it would be limited. If infinity didn't include elephants in it, then it would lack the quality of elephantness, and then it would not be infinite, and so on. Okay, so that's the second step. The third step is that existence is a possible property that one could have. And the next step is if infinity does not have existence or actuality, then it cannot be infinite. It must be finite. And then the last step is that therefore God must not only be imaginary, but actual, because God is infinity. So what do you guys think about this argument? Post down below. How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? So this is a much more convincing argument, but it really hinges on the idea of this concept of infinity. You have to really understand what infinity means. And when I say infinity, I'm not talking about mathematical infinity. I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about something more than that. So it's the sum total of all possible properties. By properties, I mean wet, cold, hot, sharp, soft, round, square, big, small, blue, red, the smell of a skunk. That's what I mean by infinity, all the possible properties. So if you kind of smush them all into one. And then existence is a possible property. Now this is a little bit tricky because if you've studied some serious philosophy, you know that arguments have been made against this kind of argument. And the argument against it is that existence actually is not a property. See, to say that a cat is red or blue or soft or sharp or big or small, these are all properties of an object called a cat. That's plausible. But to say that a cat possesses the property of existence is maybe technically not correct. Maybe existence is such a fundamental thing that it can't even be called a property. Because after all, existence is something that all properties partake in, whether something is red or cold or sharp or a cat or a dog or whatever. It can either exist or not exist. So existence is a possibility for all properties. So maybe it's not right to jump to the conclusion that even if you have an object that has all the possible properties, maybe you can't then jump to the conclusion that it must exist too. So, but see, this is tricky because this now brings in the concept of existence. And this is very tricky because this is the root. We're getting to the root here of metaphysics. What is existence? The problem is that you don't know. You don't know what existence is. Nobody knows. If you knew what existence is, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would, well, I don't want to spoil it for you. Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you. I know what existence is, so I'm holding back. I'm trying not to tell you, because I want to go through it as a newbie, right? I don't want to just give you the answers. I want to help you to see the thought process that I went through to get the answers, and then what it means to think well and what it means to think poorly. So we can't assume these things. So if we're coming from a position of ignorance, we don't know what existence is. Existence is a very mysterious, very fundamental thing, and we should be very careful about assuming stuff about existence. Whether existence is necessary or contingent, not obvious what that means. It's also not obvious what the relationship is between existence and non-existence. That's also extremely non-obvious. Does non-existence exist? And if it doesn't exist, then there's no non-existence? It gets very strange loopy here. Can existence not exist? You see, that's kind of stuff. You get into weird paradoxes. And that's not a mistake. It should be that way. But anyways, I'm not going to explain to you what existence is here. That's beyond the scope of this conversation. But let's go on to the next step of this argument, which is that if infinity does not possess existence, then it's not infinite. And this means that infinity must exist because infinity possesses all properties. Is that true? How plausible is that? I mean, you could kind of believe it, but it's not very like, it's so conceptual. We have to be very open to the possibility of self-deception. What if we're just imagining this concept of infinity, of all possible properties blending together, but then that's just like in our imagination, and then in the real world, it doesn't work that way. I mean, after all, what do we know in the real world that is an amalgamation of all possible properties in one? In fact, you might think this is impossible because, Leo, how can it seems logically incoherent to talk about an object that is both red and blue and sharp and not sharp and a cat and a dog and an elephant and not an elephant and all of this together. It seems, and it exists and it doesn't exist. It seems like this is just a fantasy, incoherent thing. Like we could talk about triangles with four sides, and we're just talking nonsense. That doesn't mean that there are these magical triangles with four sides in the real world. It just means that we're confused. It's not even at the level of being true or false. It's just meaningless. There's that third category of just meaningless nonsense. Triangles with four sides. Maybe infinity is just a triangle with four sides. And we can't conclude that therefore it actually exists. It could just be a concept. How do we know that any of our concepts have to correspond with the physical empirical reality? That's not obvious. And in fact, our everyday experience tells us that we have many, many objects and concepts in our minds that correspond to nothing in the real world. Unicorns and four-sided triangles and so on. You can think of more. So this ontological argument, in the end, not that convincing. Especially if you don't have a deep understanding of what infinity is. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. I remember I talked about layers. So on the surface, we've just been talking about the surface layer. The surface layers to these ontological arguments are not very convincing. But once you have an actual experience of infinity, if you realize infinity, and infinity is real, once you have an experience of infinity, then these actual ontological arguments will be much more convincing to you, and you will actually see that there's something profound in these arguments. It's not just a coincidence that these arguments exist. They exist for some good reasons, because they do point to something. They point to infinity, the nature of infinity. But that's in retrospect. In retrospect. You can't get to infinity from these arguments. That's a problem. That's why it's not convincing, because you have to already have experienced infinity to be convinced by these arguments. In a sense, these arguments will only prove God to those who already have experienced God. So it's kind of tautological and preaching to the choir. Preaching to the choir. Of course, that's the whole problem with God, is that those who understand it don't need to be told about it. And those who don't understand it, no matter how much you tell them about it, they won't understand it. So then why are we talking about it? Well, we're talking about it because there is value in the epistemology and the metaphysics, and to look at how our minds think about these questions. There is value in that. That's the value. The next argument is Descartes' causal argument. It goes